The sun's shining, birds are singing, and all feels right in the world.
Until the season changes, and suddenly you lose your motivation to get out of bed. In fact, 1 in 5 people experience some form of depression, no matter the season or time of year.
At the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, our vision is to build a mentally healthy nation for all, because we want you to live your best life and be your best you all year round.
Please visit mentallyhealthynation.org to learn more.
You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Jess Steyer
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
So today we are going to talk about exercise and the ways that it impacts our body and our brain. And we are joined by, I'm joined by 2 people who can tackle those topics, but our special guest for today is Dr. Joey Munoz. Joey, I'm probably going to botch this, so you'll have to jump in here, but Joey holds a PhD in nutrition sciences, and he's a fitness coach and educator. I'm a huge fan of his social media page at dr.joeymunoz. That's dr.joeymunoz, right, Joey? Did I get that right?
Yes. Yep.
Did I miss anything else about your background or expertise that you want to highlight here? Tell the folks what No, that's it. All right. No. Well, and actually, Joey, you've been on the pod before, so everyone should know who you are by now. And so I'm really excited to learn from both Joey and Sarah today. So just to lay it all out there, I am not a person who exercises. Candidly, I've never been a person who, I hate to even say this, who finds enjoyment in it. And I also just have we all do. I hate to even say this, but a super busy lifestyle, small business owner, 2 podcasts, 2 kids, 4 dogs, a partridge and a pear tree, right? So it's tough for me, but I do try to go for walks and hikes and take the dogs out when I can. But I definitely don't do enough. So with that, I wanted to just set the stage with some statistics, because apparently I'm not alone in this. And so according to recent data, only about 24% of American adults meet the CDC's guidelines for both aerobic and muscle strengthening activity. The CDC recommends at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity and muscle strengthening activities on 2 or more days per week. Then in terms of who does get enough, it's approximately 50%. I think the statistic is something like 47%, who do engage in the recommended amount of aerobic physical activity, but far fewer incorporate strength training regularly. And Joe, you're going to have to fill me in. I don't even really know what we're talking about. I feel so silly, but I don't even really know, what are we talking about? What's the difference between aerobic physical activity and versus strength training? So sure. Just let's put a pin in that for one moment. A couple of other statistics that really stood out as we were prepping for this episode. So this came from the CDC. We'll link to this in the show notes. In the U.S., it's estimated that inactivity contributes to 1 in 10 premature deaths, and about 110,000 deaths could be prevented annually if adults increased moderate to vigorous physical activity by even 10 minutes per day. And then in terms of monetary impact, inadequate levels of physical activity are associated with $117 billion with a B in annual healthcare costs. So, okay. I don't know. Where do we start? Sarah?
I'll take the baton, Jess, because I've actually got a really good quote that I think encompasses all of the reason why we are talking about this today. And it's by Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. And it was published in a Time magazine article in 2016. And he says, if there were a drug that could do for human health everything that exercise can, it would likely be the most valuable pharmaceutical ever developed. So in other words, if we could somehow bottle up everything, all the benefits of physical activity into a pill and market that, it would just break the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay, I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it really encompasses the reason why we're talking about this today. And I mean, just the sheer volume of conditions that regular exercise can help prevent, ameliorate, or delay is rather impressive. And just to give some examples to put this into context, these include stroke, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, anxiety and depression, which we will talk about a little bit later. And then in order to reap the benefits of these preventative measures of health, we need to get, according to the American Heart Association, about 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity, and in conjunction with muscle strengthening activity at least twice a week. So I think now might be a good time, Joey, for you to sort of differentiate between those two things for us.
Yeah.
For me specifically.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I love that quote. I've heard that quote before. I didn't know by who it was. I've always said, and a lot of people say this, I'm not the one who originally said this, but like, I really do think that exercise is the closest thing that we have to the fountain of youth that people are looking for. Right. In terms of the recommendations, I'm really happy that the recommendations now include strength training as well, because they used to not include strength training. It used to just say 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity, which by definition doesn't necessarily have to include strength training, right? It can include strength training, but it doesn't have to. And so I'm happy that those have been modified to include strength training as part of those recommendations. And if we really differentiate between aerobic activity and strength training, I think the simplest way for people to understand this is aerobic activity are exercises that challenge your cardiovascular function, right? So things that make you breathe really hard, where your breathing is the limiting factor in that exercise, right? Like if you're jogging or running, the reason why you stop, the reason it's really difficult is because it's very hard to breathe. It's not necessarily because your muscles are giving up, right? Where strength training is the opposite of that. The limiting factor is not your cardiovascular function. It is your muscular function, right? We can talk about specific exercises and all of that, but I think an exercise everybody's probably familiar with is a push-up, right? And if you can only do, let's say, maybe 5 push-ups or 10 push-ups, and you can't do another one, that's because your chest muscles are physically giving up. They're reaching what's called muscular failure, and that's the limiting factor. It's not because you're breathing really hard. So that's the main differentiating factor between the two types of exercises there. I'm
chuckling a little bit. I don't know if folks are watching video, like I was grinning as you're talking, because you're saying like things that when you're, hard to breathe, climbing stairs for some of us. But then when you're talking about that is an interesting way to differentiate between the two. And it makes total sense. Like when my arms or legs get like super wobbly and it feels like I can't physically go any further. And then I get that vomit feeling where I feel shaky and So Joey, let's say I come to you, you're a trainer. What would you how would you engage what would you say to try to convince me or to get me wanting to engage in the physical activity that you're describing? Like how might we help me get over that hump?
How would I convince you that you should exercise regularly? Well, I would ask you, do you want to live as long and healthy as possible, right? I think that's the main question. I think that's the underlying reason why most of us who do regularly exercise do so, right? Like there are some acute benefits, building muscle, feeling good. We'll talk about the benefits on stress relief and mental health and all of that. But deep down, I'm scared of having chronic diseases, right? I don't want to have a heart attack when I'm young. I don't want to develop other conditions. And not that exercise is going to prevent that altogether, but it definitely significantly reduces the risk. So I would say that's the first thing, right? Do you want to live as long and healthy as possible? And then for women specifically, after menopause, you lose tremendous amounts of bone density. Right. And I think this is where strength training is uniquely beneficial for women specifically, because the most powerful thing that you can do to reduce the rate at which you lose bone, because bone loss is inevitable, but you can reduce the rate of bone loss substantially, is by strength training. Because what people don't understand is that strength training, if you're lifting weights, yes, improves your muscle strength and your muscle size, but it also improves bone density. Right. Because the way that exercise works is it's essentially a stressor to your body, right? The same way we talk about hormetic effects when it comes to particular compounds in foods. Like when people talk about anti-nutrients being bad, and like we actually know that they have a hormetic effect when consumed in certain quantities that have improvements in health. Exercise is the same, right? Acutely, it's a stressor. This is a funny thing that goes hand in hand with what you were mentioning earlier, Sarah. If somebody asked you, does something that causes fatigue, muscle damage, increases in inflammation, is that good or bad? You would probably say that's bad. That's exactly what exercise does, acutely. Right? But when dosed appropriately, your body can recover from that and get stronger, right? And so it's a mild stressor, your body recovers, it's a little bit stronger. You stress it again, it gets a little bit stronger. And why am I mentioning this? Because when it comes to bone health, well, if you're lifting 5 pounds, your bone has to be strong enough to support 5 pounds. And then you get a little bit stronger, and then you lift 10 pounds, and your bone gets a little bit stronger. So your bone actually becomes more dense over time. And the reason why this is important is because what you were talking about, medical costs and risk of death earlier, osteoporosis is extremely expensive, and there's a high risk of death after the age of 70 as well. I don't remember the specific statistics, but I think it's like close to 50% of older adults above the age of 70 who fall and break a hip tend to die within the following 1 to 3 years or something like that. It's a pretty high number. And it's not directly due to the bone fracture, but they tend to go into assisted living facilities, they lose physical function, they develop other sorts of conditions, and unfortunately they pass away, right? And those things can be in part prevented by strength training and improving bone density. So hopefully I'm convincing you a bit, Jess.
You are. And then Sarah, on the other side of the coin, I don't know if that's appropriate here. I also hear a lot. So my husband, Ethan, he is very just naturally athletic. He loves exercising. He looks forward to exercising. It's something that I can't wrap my brain around, but he always says, he's like, I feel better. He describes a runner's high. I mean, what happens to the brain when we exercise?
Ooh, a good question. So the runner
didn't see that coming. I did a little bit of research surrounding this question specifically for this episode, and I found out that my knowledge was a bit out of date regarding the runner's high. So what that basically refers to is that after vigorous aerobic activity, so specifically cardiovascular activities like running or swimming or biking, as opposed to the strength training, you can feel this intense sense of euphoria and well-being. And this is often referred to as a runner's high, but it doesn't just happen with running. And the prevailing opinion originally was that this was due to the release of endorphins. But as it turns out, endorphins actually don't cross the blood-brain barrier. And what the blood-brain barrier is it's basically this net of capillaries and blood vessels that protect the brain, and it's a dynamic barrier, so it only allows certain things to get through. And endorphins can't cross the blood-brain barrier. But what we know now is that this feeling of euphoria and well-being might actually be more closely related to endocannabinoid signaling in the brain. So when we hear endocannabinoids, we think THC and marijuana, and that's true. But your brain also produces endogenous endocannabinoids, and we have receptors in our brain that activate endocannabinoids and can cause this associated feeling of mood elevation and anxiety reduction. So we think actually that now the runner's high and this feeling of euphoria and well-being is actually more closely linked to endocannabinoid signaling, and then to a lesser extent has to do with endorphins, which actually is more of associated with the lessening of pain and pain relief during intense activity. What? This is blowing my mind. I always thought it was fun fact. Wow.
And it's not to say that endorphins have no role. I mean, they do. It's because, like Joey was mentioning with the push-up example, when you exercise to exhaustion, your muscles are in pain. And so those endorphins will actually help with lessening the pain and give you more of a boost to kind of keep going.
Okay, so that's runner's high. What about other impacts on the brain? I mean, because you always say, to quote Dr. Sarah Scheinman, what's good for the body is good for the brain. So how is exercise good for the brain?
So apart from body fitness and physical, the physical fitness has a lot of benefits for the brain. I mean, it's really, really cool what all that it does to the brain. So just to give a few examples, so it improves memory and thinking skills. It enhances moods. There's also some evidence to suggest that it protects against neurodegenerative disorders. And how it does all of this is that when you exercise, there is an increase in blood flow to the brain. And there's a subsequent increase in energy metabolism that occurs all throughout the body, but specifically in the brain because your brain is a very energetically demanding organ. And what this leads to is an increase in what are called growth factors within the nervous system, and a specific type of growth factor that's called a neurotrophic factor, including BDNF and VEGF. And BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that promotes a process that's really cool. It's called neurogenesis. So generally what we think of is that with and this is by and large the case, is that you can't produce new neurons in the brain. But there's an exception to every rule, like with anything in biology. And there's a small section of the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain that controls learning and memory. And this little small section of the hippocampus actually has the ability to create new neurons. And this process is facilitated in part by BDNF, this brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So broadly speaking, exercise can in fact produce an increase in neuronal production in the hippocampus, which leads to downstream effects such as the increase in dopamine and serotonin, which are the neurotransmitters that are associated with elevated mood. So it's all connected.
Wow. What's good for the body is good for the brain. I love it. Well, so actually, I want to bring this up just this morning. So obviously, if you follow Unbiased Science on Instagram, you see we post about a bunch of different things, including I'm a public health scientist. So of course, I am also going to post about things like vaccination, right? And so I posted just yesterday about, I forget, whatever, something. Oh, no, I know what I did. I posted your quote, Sarah. I posted what's good for the body is good for the brain. And so a bunch of people jumped in and said, here it is. Here's the quote. Yet we were told none of those things will help your chances with COVID. And then another person said, exactly, can't monetize good old rest, hydration, and movement, as well as the proprietary patented shots, blah, 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 blah. Basically going on about Big Pharma. I thought this could be a cool opportunity. Like, I feel like we're talking about, I don't think anyone would ever argue. I would certainly never argue. Exercise is clearly a very important part of what keeps us healthy. It keeps our immune system functioning properly. It's good for our brain. It's good for our body. But, and I want to hear from Joey. I'm curious how you would respond to something like this. It is certainly an important factor, but I don't see how that then discredits other factors, right? Like vaccinations. And just the last thing I say, Sarah, I feel like it ties in nicely to what you were saying. Like, sure, if there was a pill that we could take that could emulate, like what the benefits of exercise, yeah, I'm sure, we would patent it and sell it, but we can't do it. So exercise is one thing in our tool belt along with these other things. So sorry, Joey, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I will happily touch on this. And I also want to touch on what you were mentioning earlier in terms of enjoyment with exercise, because I think that's an important topic to talk about as well, in terms of like just practical tips for people that may not be exercising regularly who want to, but really don't enjoy it. I think there's some really practical things that you can do to start enjoying it. And we can talk about that after.
Okay. Yes.
But as far as what you were just mentioning, I think it's silly when people like discredit one thing by using another thing that can be beneficial, right? It's like, yes, do we know that infections can have more negative impacts in people who are not healthy? Sure. We're not telling you not to exercise, not to eat healthy, not to sleep well, not to prioritize your health, but that doesn't make you immune to things, right?
Right.
You see it the same in like the nutrition space, Jess. Like, for example, fruit has sugar, right? So we're going to discredit all the health benefits of fruit simply because it has sugar. I know that's not the same sort of example, but it's like, there's this one little thing and we're going to discredit everything else because of this one thing. It's just a silly argument. It's like, there are additive effects. We know that vaccination is beneficial. We also know that exercise is beneficial. And it's just, I always think it's silly when people try to compare and contrast things like that, right? The same with nutrition general topics. People are like, calories don't matter, only food choices matter. And it's like, no, both of these variables influence each other. They're both important. I would say it's the same thing here. People just have a hard time having a nuanced conversation about things, I think.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Sarah, you are out of the dumpster fire that is social media, so you probably don't see this, but people do. I mean, this is a very, very, I see this constantly. Joey, I don't know if you see it as much. When I post about medications and antibiotics and vaccinations, as I do very commonly, it's a very common refrain. Why aren't you talking about exercise and good nutrition? And it's like, yes, absolutely, those things are important, but we often talk about like a Swiss cheese model, right? Where we do a bunch of things that help us, and they have like an additive or even, multiplicative effect. Sure. They work together to keep us healthy. So I don't know, Sarah, anything you'd want to... Yeah.
And the person who commented said that you can't monetize good old-fashioned rest and hydration and movement. I feel you definitely can monetize those things, and a lot of people do. So, I don't think that argument holds up.
Sarah, your delivery, mwah, chef's kiss.
I mean, that's what I do. I help people with exercise and nutrition.
So, Joey, before we move on, because we got some great questions, and I think that'll help facilitate even more conversation. But you said that enjoyment of exercise is sometimes a barrier. So can you drop your tips?
Yeah. So, for example, your husband saying that he loves the way he feels when he exercises. That's essentially being intrinsically motivated, right? Being motivated to do something by the way you feel. And there's really good science showing, not just with exercise, but anytime you start doing something that's difficult, it's not inherently enjoyable, right? And the goal is to get to the point where you are intrinsically motivated to do certain things, because then you do it because you enjoy it. The truth is that most people start doing things for extrinsic motivators, right? And typically I'm sharing this because I work with people who struggle with these things. So it's a little bit more application-based rather than just physiology or the science behind it. But I usually try to tell people, hey, we shouldn't just be motivated by external factors or a particular goal you want to achieve. It's important to be internally motivated by these things. But I understand that part of that process is having external motivators, right? So I think intentionally putting in small reward systems is very beneficial. Just for example, if I get my 3 workouts this week, I can buy myself this one thing that I've been wanting, right? That just builds some positive reinforcement with the behaviors that you're doing. And then the really big one is that oftentimes people think they have to go from 0 to 100 overnight, right? And what I tell when I work with clients is let's find what the minimum effective dose is that you can stick to, that you enjoy. If you don't do anything right now, Jess, going for a really intense run for an hour is going to suck. It's not going to be enjoyable, right? So just
it might kill me.
Start with 10 or 15 minutes at a moderate pace. And that is going to be uncomfortable, but it's not going to be as uncomfortable. You build in reward systems, you start to see the benefits, and that slowly becomes a little bit more enjoyable. And it's amazing how when you do that, almost your body almost asks you hey, do a little bit more now that you feel a little bit better. And slowly over time, it just gets better, right? So if we ever work with people who don't exercise at all, I would never recommend them to exercise every day, nor is that necessary for anybody. But we're just going to start with 2 little workouts, and you tell me what you think you would enjoy. And then we just start with that. And then we can do that for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we talk about how that's feeling, and we can add a little bit more as necessary. So it's just having a stepwise, methodical way to get to where you want to get to, right? I think we could say the same thing about, and I think this parallels so many things, but with nutrition, right? If somebody doesn't know anything about nutrition and they want to start eating a little bit healthier, you're not going to throw at them every single variable, have this much protein, this many servings of fruits and veggies. It's overwhelming. Maybe we just focus on, hey, let's add 1 portion of veggies to 1 of your meals. Now let's do that to 2 of your meals. Now let's focus a little bit on protein, and doing it that way makes it more enjoyable, I feel like.
I have, there's something called the Apple, it's called a cider donut run. And this is a very New England thing. I know Joey's in Florida and Sarah's in Chicago, so this is probably not a thing that happens there. But every fall at my kids' school, we go, it's like, I don't even know if it's a full 5K. We just go running around. And then at the end, they pry us? Is that the word? No, plow, whatever. They give us apple cider donuts and apple cider. So speaking of a reward after the run, although I don't know how you feel about that after a run, but that's a different conversation. But I'm going to crush it.
I love apple cider donuts.
Oh God. All right. So Sarah, did you want to add anything else before we go to our herd from the herd? We have a lot of really good questions.
Oh, I've never had an apple cider donut, but it sounds incredible, and I would like to change that.
Oh my God. Well, this is not sponsored, but I know Dunkin', they're not going to be as good as like the local donuts you could get, but I think Dunkin' now has apple cider donuts if you wanted to try them out. Don't know if it's a regional thing. Dunkin', please sponsor us. All right. So now, all right. So let's turn to our Heard from the Herd segment. Heard from the Herd. So if you don't know, we open up a question box on our Instagram page. More reason to follow us on there if you aren't already. Sarah, don't cringe. I know you hate this sort of self-promotion, but that is that is that.
I understand it's necessary. I understand.
It is. So we open up a question box and let folks submit ahead of our podcast episodes, and then we answer as many questions as possible on the episode. So we got a bunch of good questions. Let me figure out the proper order here. You answered some of this. Oh, Joey, this was a good question. Maybe you could take this one. No pain, no gain. Is this true?
To an extent, because, all right, if we define gain as progressing, and progressing can be different depending on the physical activity that you're doing, right? Like gain with cardiovascular exercise can be improving your VO2 max, right? Gain with strength training can be improving your physical strength. Exercise needs to be challenging, because you do need to challenge your physical capacities to improve your physical capacities, right? Like we were talking about earlier, exercise being a stressor. The dose needs to be sufficient to where it actually stresses the body. There's a reason why going for a 10-minute walk doesn't continually improve your VO2 max, right?
Your what?
Because you need to challenge the cardiovascular system. VO2 max is the variable that we use to measure cardiovascular function, maximal cardiovascular function. I think it's defined as like maximum oxygen uptake, essentially, or your body's efficiency using oxygen, and that improves as a byproduct of doing cardiovascular exercise. But that doesn't really, and VO2 max specifically is the main variable that's looked at in terms of like relationship between cardiovascular health and health-related outcomes. So when they talk about like cardiovascular health is associated with reduced risk of mortality, they're really looking at VO2 max. And you can predict VO2 max based off of other variables as well. But like just going for a walk is not going to improve your VO2 max. You have to run to the point where it's hard to breathe for a certain period of time. So that is pain, right? Like it definitely is pain. The same thing with strength training. I was talking about improving strength or improving bone density. Like it has to be uncomfortable. I think over time you become more comfortable feeling uncomfortable with exercise. Because it's a learned feeling. What I will say is wrong about no pain, no gain, though, is that some people take it to an extreme. You don't have to practically kill yourself every time you exercise. And in general, that could backfire as well. I'm not well versed in like the cardiovascular training programming, like how you actually train to improve cardiovascular cardiovascular function. But when it comes to strength training, there's this principle of like training sub-maximally, just meaning training slightly below maximal intensity. Maximal intensity would be like going as hard as possible every single time. If you're doing a push-up until you can't do another one every single time. And the issue is that when you do that, it prevents you from doing a large amount of exercise because you're fatigued, right? If you go really hard, you're not going to be able to do as much. And we know that intensity, which is how hard you go, is important, but volume, how much you do, is also important. So if you do the intensity so high that your volume is like really low because you can't recover from that, and it's just very, very difficult, that also is not ideal. So that would be like too much pain, which is in some ways negatively impacting your ability to gain.
Got it.
Right? So what I would recommend is like you do have to work out hard, but between a 7 and an 8 out of 10 is usually good enough. And that's a sweet spot where you can do sufficient volume as well so that you're doing enough exercise too.
All right, Sarah, I think this next question will be right up your alley. Okay. Is it true that diet and exercise decreases your chances of developing Alzheimer's?
To an extent, yes, it does. Just goes back to what I love to say, which is what's good for your general health and well-being is also good for the health of your brain. And some of those benefits that I mentioned earlier to the brain can over time really add up. And specifically, I mentioned this neurogenesis within the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is the region that is most affected by Alzheimer's disease. And it's one of the first regions that begins to atrophy or lose neuronal volume. And it's what leads to the symptoms of dementia, forgetfulness, changes of behavior, etc. So if you exercise consistently over the course of your lifetime, this is associated with a larger hippocampal volume. So your hippocampus, the size of your hippocampus, because of all this BDNF production and all of the neurogenesis, it's actually going to be larger than if you compared to someone who does not exercise regularly. And a larger hippocampus does not actually relate to greater memory capacity or someone who's smarter, greater levels of intelligence. But it does make a difference when we're talking about neurodegenerative disorders where you have a loss or a dying off of neurons. Because if you have a greater population of neurons that are dying off, you're going to have more that are left over at the end of the day. And this can help to prevent or delay the onset of symptoms related to dementia and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
You literally just blew my mind. That is incredible. No, that is so interesting. So it actually leads to a bigger brain, sort of, in a sense, or that particular part of the brain. That's wild. Okay. I don't know who maybe wants to take this next question. I don't know what goes on, Joey, if you get a zillion questions constantly about cortisol. Cortisol. It's all over my DMs. But anyway, so this question is, are there specific exercises to help lower cortisol levels? What works the best?
Yes, all of them. Jokes aside, we were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording. And I think and Sarah, feel free to chime in here. Like, it's important for people to understand the difference between acute and chronic fluctuations in not just hormones, but molecules in general, right? Because exercise acutely, as I mentioned earlier, like if I told you something causes inflammation and fatigue, like, is it good or bad? Well, exercise acutely causes inflammation and causes an increase in cortisol. And partially the increase in cortisol from exercise is because one of the roles of cortisol is to stimulate gluconeogenesis, to produce glucose for energy production during exercise, right? So it's actually beneficial. Like, we need energy to contract our muscles, which is necessary for any form of exercise. And if you are exercising for a prolonged period of time, you're converting glycogen, which is the way we store glucose in our muscles and our liver, into glucose so that can then be turned into ATP, and cortisol facilitates that process. And so if you exercise, you are going to slightly elevate cortisol, but that is an acute increase, right? Acute increases do not necessarily correlate with chronic increases. In many ways, they don't. And what we know is that if people do have chronically elevated cortisol, regular exercise, independent of the type of exercise, will result in a regulation of those cortisol levels. So it's not like, hey, sit-ups are uniquely beneficial for cortisol. Any exercise is going to help with reduction in cortisol levels.
Got it. All right, Sarah, I'm thinking maybe you could answer this next question. So you just answered about Alzheimer's, but then we got a question about how does exercise affect anxiety and depression?
So I actually think that this goes a little bit hand in hand with what Joey was just talking about with regards to cortisol. But in addition to that, specifically when we're talking about cardiovascular exercise, so aerobic exercises like running, swimming, biking, these are associated with an increase in levels of the neurotransmitters dopamine and serotonin, which when we're talking about diseases or conditions like depression and anxiety, these are sometimes associated with a dysregulation in neurotransmitter levels in regions of the brain that control emotion, such as the amygdala. So with regular physical activity, the neurotransmitter levels can actually equilibrate, and the levels of the kind of feel good neurotransmitters will regulate and increase, which can be associated with an enhanced or an elevation in mood.
Got it. Okay. Wow. You guys are making a very good case for exercise, by the way. Let's just take one more question and then we'll start wrapping up. Joey, this one stood out to me. I thought it was interesting. I hadn't heard this before. I don't know if you get this a lot. I recently heard that stretching is unnecessary before or after exercise. Is this true or false?
Yeah, it depends on how nuanced we want to get into this conversation. The word necessary is a finicky one because, necessary for what, right? I will say people tend to use static stretching as a warm-up modality for exercise, and that definitely is not necessary. When it comes to strength training, there's also some evidence to show that prolonged static stretching before heavy resistance training can negatively impact your strength performance. There are some methodological issues with some of these studies, but even if we don't talk about that, if we think about what the purpose of a warm-up is, static stretching doesn't necessarily tick any of the boxes there. When it comes to warming up, you want to get your body warm, blood flowing, get your joints loose, and that's achieved substantially more effectively by just doing a little bit of cardiovascular exercise, right? Like if you bend over and touch your toes, you're not really raising your core body temperature, getting yourself warm. And then static stretching doesn't really prime your muscles for whatever specific exercise you're going to be doing. There's a big difference between static and active stretching, right? Active stretching would be doing like a leg swing rather than just like bending over and touching your toes and hanging out there for a little bit, right? So active stretching actually primes the muscles because you're contracting the muscles to move your joints through a full range of motion, right? So in general, when it comes to warming up, I don't recommend static stretching. I recommend spending maybe 5 minutes doing some cardio just to get your heart rate up, get some blood flowing, which is important, and then warm up specifically for the type of exercise that you're going to be doing at just a lower intensity. What do I mean by that? If you're going to sprint, just do some light jogs. That's going to prime the muscles of your legs for that exercise. If you're going to be doing a squat with a certain amount of weight, just warm up with doing squats with just your body weight or a slightly lighter weight. That's going to prime you for that movement. And what I tell people is when you do exercises, you're technically stretching throughout the exercise. If you do a squat and you go all the way down, you are stretching your quads, you are stretching your glutes because you're fully flexing or bending those joints. Static stretching also doesn't necessarily improve flexibility that much either, because there's a big difference between flexibility and mobility. Flexibility is just being able to get into a particular range passively, where mobility is being able to get into those ranges actively, right? I could talk about this for a long time. I don't know how deep you want me to get into it. That's like passive stretching. Yeah, you might be able to bend over and touch your toes, but can you get into a deep squat with your body weight? You would argue that that's more important for physical function.
Got it. Well, no, that was super informative. Sounds like we might need a whole episode on just that one question. Really, Joey, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like you and Sarah are the best PR ever for exercise in general. I'm going to try to get my butt outside more. I really do understand the importance of it, and maybe I could build in little rewards and figure out a way to increase my enjoyment, to make it more, what did you say, intrinsically rewarding? Was that the phrase? Or motivated, sorry. Yeah. Yes, love it. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Joey, thank you again. And you can follow Joey at dr.joeymunoz on Instagram. And you're on all the socials, or is it mainly Instagram?
Yeah, everywhere. And on YouTube, it's where I publish my podcast as well. Also just Dr. Joey Munoz.
Love it. Awesome. And thank you all so much for tuning in, for all of your support. A reminder that we are on Instagram. We're posting infographics regularly. Follow us at Unbiased SciPod. We also put out a newsletter that we used to say was a weekly newsletter, but we're putting out like 2 or 3 newsletters a week because we have a lot to say. So you can subscribe for free at Substack. It's theunbiasedscipod.substack.com. There is a paid subscription option if you are able and willing to support us. But really, just thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Oh, and last thing, subscribe on YouTube, please. And also feel free to leave us a review on Apple or wherever you tune into podcasts. Sarah, take us home.
All right, guys, we hope you learned a thing or two. Join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.